Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. As someone who is a massive fan of Anne Rice as an author and the Vampire Chronicles ranking first as my all-time favourite franchise, I know I'm not the only one who's identified that the vast majority of Chronicles vampires are, well, gay. Or at least they appear to be, if that even makes sense. This is a largely talked about topic in the vampire community, with so many fans asking why Anne made all her vampires gay. What's it all about? Is it a writer's preference, or does it actually factor into the changing anatomy and mindset of an individual after they become a vampire? That's something I want to discuss today because Anne Rice's vampires are really gay. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Don't take me up wrong with that one. I just want to know why there's no real balance between the sexual preferences of the characters in the books. Many fans like it that way, judging from the backlash received for the straightwashing of Lestat, for example, in Queen of the Damned, when they fabricated a romantic sexual relationship with Jessie that stood out like a sore thumb. So what's the deal with all of the Anne Rice vampires being gay? Let's take a look. Anne Rice has always been a massive supporter of the gay community. Long before she wrote Interview with the Vampire, she had dozens of gay friends and even moved to San Francisco to be closer to them. She stated in multiple interviews that she viewed love as love, and that it always transcended gender. It was person for person and not man for woman. However, she didn't actually intend to deploy a homoerotic feel to the Interview with the Vampire novel. She stated that she didn't even realize the relationships she created had such homosexual tendencies, that it just came natural to her while she was writing. She wanted the focus of her characters' problems and issues to be the talking point, not their sexual preference. But with that being said, it was only after the book was released did people highlight how bold a stance the story made to have two men lead the way on the basis of a romantic relationship. Now, we have a lot of same-sex companions throughout the Vampire Chronicles. There's Lestat and Louis, Lestat and Nicky de l'Enfant, Louis and Armand, Marius and Armand, or Amadeo as he was called at that particular time, Armand and Daniel, Lestat and Gabriel, Marius and Thorn. That's just to name a few. When an individual becomes a vampire in Anne's world, they lose the human desire for sexuality according to physical attraction and instead gravitate to the person guided by the unique individual beauty that comes with that vampire in question. A good example of this is when Louis first encountered Lestat. Upon first reflection, he was immediately entranced by Lestat's vampiric beauty, the aura around him, the desire to be in his presence. It really affected Louis, like he was really taken aback by Lestat. But after Louis became a vampire, he no longer saw the beauty of his maker through his vampire eyes. He had no urge, no feeling. He didn't crave Lestat as he did beforehand. He seen him now in a completely different light. Lestat didn't exactly fit the bill for the companion Louis felt like he truly wanted. This is what happens with vampires. They are able to identify more attractive traits in what the vampire can bring in terms of longevity, as immortality, as we know, is basically forever. It is forever. The gender doesn't matter, only the individual. Vampires have certain asexual tendencies, so anything superficial is of little interest to them. If we stay with Louis as an example for a moment, why was he so sought after by Lestat and Armand? Why so desirable from a vampiric perspective? Because Louis had what no other vampire had, or very little vampires had to say the least, and that was an underlying connection to his humanity. Louis held on to the parts of his human life, fighting against his natural urge to dispel with everything from the person he used to be. This brought a pureness to Louis and argued the debate of vampires having souls. He made himself one of a kind, and it drew Lestat and Armand to him. Probably Armand more so than Lestat. Louis as a person completely shattered the norm of gender preference. In his eyes, he seen Armand as a wealth of knowledge, someone who could guide him in ways he could have never received from Lestat. He looked upon Armand as the companion he had always needed. Both vampires acknowledged the attraction to each other due to what they provided to the companionship. Sexuality is not the first aspect, but it does not mean that it is non-existent. If we now take a look at Armand, for example, and his later relationship with Daniel, it also shows what happens when the connection is void of human desire. Armand as a vampire was attracted to everything that surrounded Daniel as a human. It was the same with Louis, but Daniel was still human. He became very attached to Daniel, viewing him as the long-term or eternal companion he had been waiting for. Daniel, on the other hand, was intrigued and almost spellbound by Armand's aura and his vampiric beauty. Everything about the world of vampires was intoxicating to Daniel. He wanted it all, but it came from a human desire. He looked at Armand the way Louis first looked at Lestat. Remember, he is a different being entirely from a vampire at that point. Armand eventually turns Daniel, and as soon as Daniel's human emotions depart his mind and body, they're replaced with the heightened senses that accompany the vampire physiology. Daniel becomes disillusioned with life as a vampire and resents Armand, no longer seeing him in the same light. Armand, in love with the humanity that Daniel possessed, also grows resentful yet paranoid of Daniel's change of personality. It causes a massive strain on the relationship, and the two realize they are not suitable as companions despite initially enjoying a human-vampire relationship. From an inside the Chronicles world perspective, vampires always choose compatibility and not gender. It just so happened that the majority of the characters chose men as companions, even though from an outside perspective, Anne was favouring the gay side of things. I feel that it's pretty cool that we can look at this topic from an inside and outside of world perspective. We have the author's reasoning, but because of the physiology and the mindset of vampires, we can also address it in the world too. But if we just go back to the writer's perspective for a moment, let's go outside the world of the Vampire Chronicles. We can take a look at where the sexuality of vampires or homoerotic nature actually hampered the initial production of the Interview with the Vampire movie. Now, we got this movie in 1994, and it was a classic. It still is a classic. It was a classic that was actually expected to fail, and it remains, in my opinion, a cinematic masterpiece. But you may not be aware that Anne initially sold the movie rights to Paramount Pictures over 15 years prior to the film's release. Paramount said that the nature of the story, having two male leads who were romantically involved, was just too risque for the big screen, despite movies like Lust for a Vampire being deemed acceptable. Anyway, that's for another day. Anyway, Paramount sat on the movie for several years, with Anne doing all she could to get the movie pushed ahead, even offering to make Louis a woman for the film, something she's glad she never did in the end, and said she would have deeply regretted. Paramount ended up losing the rights back to Anne because they never made the movie, and it was picked up by Warner Brothers instead. Neil Jordan directed, Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt stole the show, despite being tipped to flop, and the movie was a massive success, holding the highest opening weekend for a vampire release to date. So guys, that's my take on why the Anne Rice vampires are gay. Let me know if you have anything to add in the comment section below, and I'll respond to as many comments as possible. Take care, and we'll chat soon.